How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
Today on Climate One, we talk about honing your communication skills for a green career.
If we just talk about, apocalypse and hopelessness and pointlessness, it's easy to give up. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful about and positive about.
Then we focus on specific skills and how to use them to protect the climate.
Being able to identify what matters to the other people in the room, what drives them and what motivates them, and to be able to frame the case for what you're proposing in terms that they're going to understand and they're going to speak to their motivations is incredibly valuable.
But first we talk about youth and getting them engaged with STEM and climate science.
And if you think of all the different things that the environmental movement, sustainability movement, climate change, all those different areas, what things are of interest to you? Because you're going to have to kind of have some degree of specializing, position yourself to really find that match.
Up next on Climate One.
Minda Berbecco, let's talk with you and go to San Diego, where the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, approached you because they were trying to get more education in schools about climate. So tell us when they approached you.
Sure. They were interested in bringing more climate change into their local schools. They saw it as an issue not just for politicians, but one for their classrooms and for students. And they wanted the PTA to step up to do that. So if you have never been to a PTA convention before, it's quite an amazing experience. So it's like a political convention, but instead of people jostling about the politician they're going to vote for, instead they're all advocating for their children's education. So it's thousands of people shouting and dancing and so on. And so they wanted to bring a resolution to the PTA to talk about climate change. And it was an incredible experience. I've never been around more passionate people. So they brought it to the convention, and there were many interesting conversations that happened with different PTAs around the state. Should this be considered a children's issue? Should this be something that schools should be addressing? And some people didn't agree. Some people felt like, no, this is something that parents should be talking about, or this is really more political. But in fact, in the end, it was the PTA of California, the majority of the folks agreed that climate change is a children's issue, and the PTA should be doing more to help schools bring climate change into their classrooms.
And now they're trying to take it to the national PTA, which how's that going? There's nothing more political than a PTA.
That's true. But you have to keep in mind that everyone there is really advocating for their children. So everyone there really has their kids' best interests at heart. And I think that was my biggest takeaway from that. And, it might be a bit of a fight and it might be a big challenge, but they were such strong supporters. And I feel like the parents and teachers of California are such strong supporters of climate change education that they can really bring it there.
Alex Whistler, you headed Chabot Space and Science Center when the Nye Climate Lab was brought there. So tell us about the development and introduction of that lab. Bill Nye is a rock star in science, but tell us about that development.
Bill Nye and the Climate Lab. Well, we recognize the fact that it was a real challenge. This is now 7 or 8 years ago. To how do we communicate climate change education to kids, or the issues around climate change to kids. And so we sought to do that in a way that presented a positive message. So we did 3 things. One, we wanted to talk about what is the science that we know? What do we know? How do we know that carbon is increasing and is causing a rise in temperatures? Then, what do we do about it? And so there we activated a series of programs for the kids to come in and not only think about what the science is, but also what they could personally do, or maybe encourage their parents to do. And I think a lot of the environmental and climate change education programs sort of seek to do similar things. Cool the Earth is another one, Alliance for Climate Education, a third, there's many. And I think, at the heart of it all, it's around how do we give our kids a positive vision of the future? Because if we just talk about, apocalypse and hopelessness and pointlessness, it's easy to give up. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful about and positive about. And I know that's the energy that Bill brings to it. And as you probably saw in the press, he continues to fight this fight, even with some political figures in our national leadership. And so bottom line, it's communicating a message about and empowering the kids.
And one key to making it upbeat is making it fun. Cool the Earth does things like have student plays. Actually, the youngest person ever interviewed at Climate One was a 6th grader who I think was the villain in a school play.
Perfect.
He was Mr. Carbon, right?
Carbon.
And he scared away the polar bear, and the polar bear went running away. So what does Cool the Earth? They make games. How do they make it fun for kids to learn about climate?
So the Cool the Earth program, I think, is genius. They go into the schools and present a play in an all-school assembly. And the characters in the play are teachers and parents in the school acting out these various roles. So there's evil Mr. Carbon, and there's the wonderful Coda that we're trying to save Coda's life. And but then the message that the kids take away from that program is, now you can go home and we want you to take some actions, and we want to get your parents to take some actions. And then when they do those actions, this is typically over a 4-week period, they come back to school and they get little rewards, a sticker or a pencil. And if you haven't been to one of these programs or seen these kids engaged in this, I highly recommend it because it's so powerful. It's not high tech, but it's very high touch, and the kids get emotionally engaged, and the parents take the actions. And as a result, Cool the Earth has seen now over nearly 200,000 students, 500 schools, and we're tracking the carbon, and we believe we've reduced carbon by 250 million tons.
Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. Minda Berbecco, climate has become political, controversial. So what's it like for a teacher in a classroom to think, well, I'm not sure if I know this science is complicated. It's pretty new since I went to school maybe. And the parents might get upset. I'm not sure what my principal thinks. So tell us about teachers bringing climate into the classroom and some of the pressures they face.
Well, it's tricky. In some communities where teachers have a lot of support, it's not an issue at all. And in fact, what we'll find, like with San Diego, they were really strongly advocating for more opportunities to bring climate change in the classroom. But unfortunately, in other communities, there is a lot of resistance to it. Folks think that it's political, and it's not just parents coming in or not just students coming in and challenging the science, but sometimes you might get a school board member. So I was working with one teacher in an eastern state, and I won't identify where, but he had a challenge where the school board member demanded every single one of the pieces of material that he had on climate change that he was distributing to students. And then it had an outside quote unquote expert come in and just go through the materials with a red pen and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. He sent those materials to me. They were extraordinarily well cited. He cited the very radical groups like NASA and NOAA in all of his work. And so all his T's were crossed, all his I's were dotted. And yet he still had this challenge. The nice thing, though, is that a lot of times when these challenges come up, teachers feel like, oh my gosh, I'm alone, and you're really not, because there is a very strong community that supports climate change education. And sometimes it's just a matter of reaching out to other teachers, reaching out to the Science Teacher Association in your state, or even reaching out to parents in your community, just to make sure that you have that support. So when someone does come down on you, you can say, look, go talk to all them, and they can support you.
And a corollary issue is the battle over textbooks, right? You deal
Sure.
with evolution as well as other climate change. So tell us about the textbooks, and is evolution kind of making its way back in, and is climate being squeezed out?
So that's a great question. We've seen a lot of similarities between the pushback between evolution and climate change. They're a little bit different, and one of the big challenges that climate change suffers from, and this is California specific, a study came out this past year that really evaluated how are textbooks addressing climate change. And what they found is there's a lot of hedging in the language. We might think this, scientists believe this, whereas we don't talk about gravity in the same way. We don't talk about other areas of science in that way. And so there's this very kind of subtle, underhanded approach to climate change. And in defense of the authors, they want their books to be accepted, and they know that people are going to rise up and challenge the way climate change is approached unless they hedge their language. But as a result, students come away thinking, well, they might think that climate change is happening. It could be happening, whereas we have such a strong body of evidence about it. It shouldn't be approached in that way.
Alex Whistler, this gets to the heart of science, where things that are well established are still called theories, and things that are not fully known. There's always a little bit of doubt in science, and scientists like to test things and test their doubt, and that seems like America's having a hard time understanding that.
Well, I'm struggling right now because there was a great piece recently that I blogged out on the misunderstanding of what a theory is. So in science, a theory is a well-established set of principles that have been scientifically tested over a long period of time and validated. So that's the theory of gravity. I mean, that's the theory of evolution. But people in the public, they think, well, I have a theory that if I do X, Y, and Z, something will happen. Well, no, that's not a theory. That's a hypothesis, okay? And so, but we do get tied up in this notion of the word theory. And so that's just one thing for everyone to carry away. When you hear someone saying, well, it's just a theory, we'll say, well, theories are, in science terms, a theory is a very powerful construct. And so it's not just a theory. It's validated by, in some cases, hundreds of years of scientific experimentation. So yeah, when you were talking about that, that's exactly where I was going to go. So you fed me that question.
Tell us about what you're doing down at Moffett Field. There's a cool new science center that's going to happen down there, Alex Whistler, right near Google and Moffett Field.
Right. So Google has a plan and an obligation to build a brand new 90,000 square foot STEM/STEAM public educational facility right there at Moffett Field, right next to NASA Ames. And right now we're working with them to try to envision what that might be. I think it's going to be in a couple of years, but it's very exciting. I think we're talking to a lot of program partners, folks like the Girl Scouts of Northern California, Tech Bridge. There's a lot of great work, and all of those not only do work in STEM education, but they also do a lot of work in climate. So I think more and more STEM and climate is all blending into one because that's one of the reasons why we want young people to get into the sciences and engineering is to solve and tackle the challenges that climate and other issues are bringing before us.
What are some things you've learned from kids, whether either the kids that you encounter through your work for the National Center for Science Education? What are some things you've learned from kids about climate?
Oh, everything. First of all, I think that one of the greatest things I've learned from the PTA, from being on the board of the California Science Teachers Association, and also from organizations like ACE and Cool the Earth, is how powerful kids are. They have an unending amount of energy, an unending amount of enthusiasm, and if you can get them excited about stuff, they are just an extremely powerful voice to bring to the table. And not only that, but if you want change to happen, having a child come home and say, why are we driving to school every day when it's only 3 blocks away? Can we walk? I mean, those are the things that get parents thinking and get adults changing too.
I mean, I think, we can certainly measure the number of kids, the number of, the learning that they do when they're there. I think it is more challenging to track the long-term impact. What happens when they go home? What happens in 5 years? Do they get into STEM programs, et cetera? I think it's one of the fallacies of these, well, not a fallacy. I think sometimes there's an expectation that any individual program is going to change an individual's life or save the world. It's not that, but it is all of it combined. But I think we should also be optimistic, and particularly with our kids, because they are absolutely, as you say, in the vanguard. They're one by one changing the world, and their expectations and their actions are going to be a lot different than what I experienced growing up, and I think it's going to be good, actually.
Let's go to our audience questions. Welcome to Climate One.
So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about coding and STEM, but also the crossover between these coding boot camps and getting women into STEM, and also the environment, if you could talk about that crossover.
And Rebecca, any thoughts on the crossover technology?
Yeah, I think that's a great question that we don't spend enough time actually talking about. And I think that when we talk about coding, we talk about a very specific thing, as opposed to sort of a possible answer to a lot of our challenges. And I think one really good example of that is in schools, oftentimes we feel like we're just learning this one specific topic and it's not relevant. And so if you're learning coding, it's not relevant to these other fields. And so maybe bringing it in project-based, sort of reversing that and say, here's the big question. how are we going to answer it? And coding is one of the ways that we can answer it. So just as a small anecdote, a really good example is I got my PhD in biology, and I was really interested in being outdoors and in the environment. And then I spent all this time doing statistics. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. I hate statistics. And so it didn't occur to me that, of course, you need all these things. I was doing chemistry, I was doing statistics, I was doing calculus, and I needed it in order to answer these questions that I genuinely was interested in about the environment. And I think the more we can bring those things in, the better it will be for people to understand the usefulness of how these things integrate together.
Alex Whistler, solution. Science tends to focus on problems, right, and what's not known, but a lot of science is needed for battery breakthroughs, big innovations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we did at Chabot with Bill Nye is we had a sort of an ideation station where kids could sit down and draw out their own solutions, their own, crazy ideas. And then we took those, and some of the best ones, we actually turned over to local artists. And then they actually built these little things that these kids imagined.
Cool.
So it was taking it from a wacky idea to something that could actually possibly be, and they could actually see a prototype of it. So I think it's that on that thread, continuing that positive message that you can come up with ideas. Not only can you come up with them, but we can actually prototype them, we can build them and test them and see if we can make them work. And I think that's where the kids get excited.
Let's go to our next audience question. Welcome.
As I understand it, the United Nations reports that if you're looking at like a pie chart of the causes of climate change, 40% is due to energy, 40% is due to industrial agriculture, and 20% is miscellaneous, like a variety of reasons. But when I come to events like this, I find that everyone, there's a lot of momentum behind energy, transitioning to sustainable energy. But when I come to events like this, I find that most people are not aware that industrial agriculture is such a huge part of the problem. Like, it's basically equally like a part of the problem as transitioning to sustainable energy, and at the same token, transitioning from industrial agriculture to sustainable agriculture is equally a part of the solution. So I'm kind of just wondering, why is there such a gap in that education?
Food, Minda Rebecca, is often overlooked, and it's a big part of the solution.
So it's interesting you say that, because I think in the public sphere, we talk a lot more about energy when we talk about climate change. But interestingly, since the next generation science standards came up, there's actually quite a few other opportunities in science classrooms to talk about climate change. One is the most basic is the carbon cycle. And when you're addressing the carbon cycle, certainly talking about agriculture is one of the ways that teachers address climate change. So I think it is interesting, sort of in the public sphere, we address energy, we're very focused on it, but in classrooms it tends to be more nuanced, and there are opportunities to talk about different impacts of climate change from these different components.
Alex Whistler, is food going to be part of this new Google museum down there?
I was thinking about your question, though. I wonder if this is just a hypothesis, not a theory, that maybe it's easier to get our brains around the energy challenges, whether it's oil or fossil fuels, et cetera. And whereas food is at such a broad range of issues that pile up together, maybe it's not as linear or as simplistic. That's just a guess.
But it's something that people can, as Michael Pollan says, you can vote with your fork every day. You can affect every day. That's both an opportunity and makes it hard.
Up next, we talk about communication skills and cleaning up the climate.
Lyrica McTiernan, let's begin with you. You grew up in Maine and then came to the Presidio Graduate School. Tell us about that journey.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I grew up on the coast of Maine and loved hiking, loved being outdoors. I think that's where my passion for sustainability and doing this type of work really started. And went to Oberlin College in Ohio, did an undergraduate degree in environmental studies, and from there did a number of things related to environmental education and green building. Lived in Chicago for a bit, was kind of bouncing around, and then ended up here in 2007, where I worked for the Goldman Environmental Prize. It's a local NGO, and I was working on their nomination process and recognizing the amazing work that grassroots environmental leaders do all over the world. I felt as though I wanted to be contributing more. I was so inspired by all the work these people were doing. And for me, I think that meant getting a few more tools in my tool belt. So I decided to go to business school. As Greg mentioned, I went to Presidio Graduate School here in San Francisco because I felt as though I needed to be able to speak the language of business a little bit more effectively in order to do the kind of work that I really wanted to do, which was in the for-profit sectors.
And Lyrica McTiernan, you say that what drives you deeply is a deep love for nature. So when you go into a meeting in Facebook, do you go in and say, we gotta save the earth?
Being realistic and being who you are is one of, I think, the really valuable things you can do when you go into a room. People can sense authenticity, and they can sense if you're not being authentic. But by the same token, you can't leave it there. Because if you're talking to somebody for whom that kind of motivation doesn't resonate, if you leave it there, you're going to be walking right out the door again, and you're not going to get anything done. And so being able to identify what matters to the other people in the room, what drives them and what motivates them, and to be able to frame the case for what you're proposing in terms that they're going to understand and they're going to speak to their motivations is incredibly valuable.
So how do you do that? Say Facebook wants to get off coal and run on cleaner energy. It's going to cost a little more. You have to convince some financial person that that's good for the company, good for profits ultimately. How do you do that?
It's a great question. Well, first of all, it doesn't always cost more. That's an important note. I think it's a really exciting time because clean energy is becoming really cost effective now, which is really exciting. But I think to your point, one of the things that is important to think about is that people think about risk and people think about reliability. And some of these topics are complicated and matter a lot when you're talking about what kind of energy source you're using, for example. And so bringing in some of these nuances into the conversation, so it's not just, X cents per kilowatt hour versus Y cents per kilowatt hour, but it's really more about the context of the decision that you're making and what impact that's going to have on the long-term viability of your infrastructure.
Charlotte McAuslan, Lyrica mentioned being authentic. For people who want to get into a fast-growing clean tech company, how do they present themselves? What are some tips for going in there and sort of trying to convince someone that they should be hired for Solar City or someone else?
Yeah, I think it's the same in clean tech as it is in any industry with any job. People want to believe you that you are really there, you have staying power, you're interested in joining and contributing to the company long term. So again, going back to things like language, if you know the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour, you don't necessarily need to go to grad school to learn the language or to bone up on particular subject matter. But if you can show that you've done your homework, I think that can help convey your authenticity.
So people need to convince themselves, be convincing that they don't want to just work for Solar City because it's cool and Elon Musk is the chairman, right?
That's right.
Something like that, okay. Killy Wax, is it more important to have a great boss or work for a cool company?
Well, hopefully you can do both. But I think, I think it ultimately depends on where you are in your career. But I think early in your career, I would say focus on working for great people. Mentors can be incredibly powerful and beneficial, not only for the short term, not only for your short-term life, but also for the long term. These are folks that are going to be guiding and modeling the behavior you're going to have in your career forever. And the sooner you can have great bosses and mentors, the better you'll be. And a great boss and a great mentor is someone that is truly looking out for your development, is not just seeing you as a resource to get to another objective. It's someone that really is going to invest into your development personally and professionally.
Charlotte McAuslan, Solar City engineering company, do you feel like there's a need to be an engineer to sort of make it to the top? And what are some of the different personality types that can find a place in a company like Solar City?
I think you do need to learn how to speak the language and talk about things like demand charges and kilowatt hours. That's what our business is. But I'm on the commercial sales team, and we have a team of proposal writers. We have a team of analysts who run the financial models. We have accountants. We have salespeople who go out and are the face of the company to the customers. And then we have our financial team. There's many different skill sets represented.
Any women on the executive committee at Solar City?
We do not have any women in the C-suite yet,
And
but
so,
we're working on it.
And do you feel like there's the same career path, upward mobility for women as there are for men in a company that's kind of, solar is kind of more, I don't know, installation, it's kind of a guy thing?
I think the energy industry as a whole is very male dominated, and you go to these trade shows and conferences, and the line for the men's room is longer than the lines for the women's room, which is something you rarely see. And that's reflected at Solar City, and I think a lot of other companies like that. But it's a known issue, and there are some formal programs that have been put in place to encourage women to grow and connect them with mentors. And I have met some of the smartest, strongest female leaders that in my career to date at Solar City.
Lyrica McTiernan, sometimes luck or serendipity plays a role. Tell us how you actually got into Facebook.
And I was working at the Goldman Environmental Prize and going to business school, and lo and behold, one of my colleagues at business school, one of my fellow students, her friend worked at Facebook. And she came up to me one day and said, hey, I heard there's a VP over there who's really interested in having Facebook expand what it's doing around sustainability. Do you think we should write him an email and, mention that we're business school students and we have some interesting ideas? And I said, sure, why not? Don't have anything to lose. So we sat down and said, what would you write to a VP at Facebook about sustainability that would be compelling? And we wrote an email, and were somewhat shocked when he replied and said, do you guys want to come down for a meeting at our Palo Alto office? At the time we were in Palo Alto. And we said, absolutely. And sat down and brainstormed some more and said, what do you say in an hour-long meeting to a VP at Facebook about sustainability that'll be compelling? And went down and had a meeting, and it went well. And we were brought on initially as contractors to see whether there was a there there. They had no sustainability team at the time. And so it was a bit of a leap of faith for that company to figure out how do they want to really start a team that's focused on this. And for us, it was a bit of a leap of faith. I had to leave my job at the Goldman Prize and try this out, didn't know where it was going to go. But after a year, we were able to demonstrate that there was enough value in what we were doing that it really did need to become a permanent part of what the company does.
Let's talk about the importance of culture. Killy Wax, you were at PG&E. The culture there was a certain type, not for you. So talk about the importance of culture fit. People often think about looking for a job, they think about the company, and culture is a little hard to get at.
You may have this ideal of what a company is because of what they produce or what they do, but the people in that organization may not be a good fit for you, right? It doesn't mean that they're bad people or that they're doing bad things or that they're not people you want to associate with. It's just people who you don't necessarily want to work with. It's not a culture you want to work with. I mean, you look at me, I'm a pretty casual guy, right? I'm a lifelong surfer. I say gnarly, right? At a place like PG&E, that was charming for folks there. But it was never a place where I felt like this was going to be a place where I'm going to be forever. But it was a great place to learn, and I don't ever regret being there. But it wasn't a place that Killy Wax surfer guy was ever really a perfect fit,
Charlotte McAuslan, how do you describe the culture at Solar City, and how can you kind of identify what a culture of a company is if you're not inside it?
Great question. I think Solar City is a really fast-growing company with a huge sales organization. So I would say the culture of sales is predominant. And the best way to figure out what a culture feels like before you join is to find at least 3 people who work there and ask them.
Let's go to our audience questions. Welcome to Climate One. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm curious, how did you orient a interest in environmentalism or sustainable practices? How did you go from just that general desire to your specific careers?
We'd like to tackle that one.
Well, for me, I tried a little bit of everything. I spent a little bit of time doing environmental education work. I went into the green building sector. I worked in an NGO. And I think it was very helpful for me to understand what I liked about each of those things and what I didn't. And I think it can be, some people know exactly what they want to do right out of the gate, and kudos to them, that's amazing. But if you don't worry about it. Try things out and see what it is about the things that you like, that you really like. And that is what I did, and I think I would have been shocked if you told me in high school that I was going to be working in tech. I would not have thought that. I would have thought I would have stayed in environmental education, but when I went into that field, I realized it wasn't what I really wanted. So don't be afraid to try things out.
And Charlotte McAuslan, someone could be an accountant at Solar City and still be in the clean tech business, and they're counting all that money you're making, but it's,
That's right.
but they're not a clean tech per se, right?
That's right. So, and on my team, for example, I think of our proposal writer team. Like, this is a team of English majors from college who now spend all day writing about our products and our competitive advantages and winning us business. So they're great writers. They're an awesome team of really talented people, and probably would not describe themselves as techies in any way.
Let's go to our next question. Welcome.
Solar energy is often thought of as a expensive commodity that only upper class citizens can afford. What are some ways that solar energy is becoming or can become more affordable?
Charlotte McAuslan.
So that is, I completely hear you, and I'm familiar with that sentiment. I think if you look at the data, if you do a Google search of cost of solar power, you'll see that, like any other new product, the cost curve is dropping really quickly. And actually, part of the reason that solar has grown so much in the past couple years, 2 or so years, is that in a lot of areas, solar, granted, combined with some of the policy initiatives out there that are in place to encourage solar, is actually less expensive per kilowatt hour than the alternative from the existing electric grid. So I think, as technology improves and things like energy storage come online that help spread the cost out over more hours, you're going to see solar getting more and more competitive. But it's already actually very competitive in a lot of areas.
Let's go to our next question. Welcome to Climate One.
In your company, when you guys, I hear a lot that solar panels are attacked for the fields, solar fields are quote unquote ugly and take up too much space. So with that, how do you combat that? And then also, have you thought of using space in solar at all, and pros and cons with that?
Okay, so I'm going to speak as Charlotte McAuslan, not as Solar City here. I think that people have their own taste, and some people think a solar field is ugly, some people don't. I think as things become more common, people get used to seeing them and become more aware of the benefits of a solar plant in your backyard versus a coal plant in your backyard. Those sentiments will change. I'm not personally a big fan of clear cutting to build solar. That's ground mount solar. That's a personal, pain point of mine that I know is happening in some places. But I would say we're aware of that, and Solar City is aware of that, and there, a lot of times when we're building a big ground mount project somewhere, there will be big community gatherings in the process in order to discuss, why is this happening? Why is this field getting developed? And is this really something we want? So I think community engagement's a part of that, going to, town meetings and things like that, and hearing questions and listening and showing empathy is always the right way to build consensus.
Killy Wax, you were part of the biggest solar plant in the world. Some environmentalists were upset about that. There were some sensitive turtles.
Yeah, it was gnarly. We built the largest solar plant in the world in the Mojave, and there was a green-on-green battle. There were folks that were supportive because they thought climate change was the most pressing issue of our time and we should be building as much solar as possible. And there were those that were fans of terrestrial creatures and they didn't want any disruption. And frankly, I totally understand both perspectives on it. I do think, though, that the scale required in order to address climate change is one that most people still don't quite get. And there are going to be compromises. It's just a fact. So if we want to address this issue, if we want to get ahead of it, then we're going to have to build at scale, whether it's rooftop, whether it's ground mounted in the desert or by local communities. We got to do it.
Let's go to our last audience question. Welcome.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Jason. I'm just curious. I'm thinking of getting a master's in sustainability management at Columbia. I was wondering what colleges, universities do you guys think have like the best programs, like sustainability programs, or, should I get an MBA? Should I get, like what's like a good path for education?
I probably won't call out specific programs, but I will say the interesting thing about sustainability is that there is no one path, which makes it great and makes it really challenging as well, because there's no specific route to follow. But what's nice about that, I mean, if you look at our team, we have people somebody with a background in chemical engineering. We have an architect. We have a hydrological engineer. We have a couple of us from the business community. We have a CS, the guy who leads our team actually has a background in computer science. And so you can kind of come at this from any number of different angles. And I think the key is identifying what is it that you want to have be your specialty, and go deep. Go deep there so you can have a real deep skill set that you can bring to a team and say, hey, I can really come and help your team by providing this specific set of skills. And that way, you can really kind of fill a gap that team might have. So again, find what makes you passionate and follow that.
Still to come, pursuing your dreams in a clean energy economy.
So Catherine Walsh, I'd like to begin with you. Talk about the soft skills. Obviously, graduates from UC Berkeley have big brains and high GPAs and lots of skills. What are the soft skills they need to enter the workforce today?
A lot of what we talk about are, especially in a very social media driven, tech heavy society, is not losing sight of skills around public speaking, meetings, being able to have meetings and conversations with folks. Really that kind of interpersonal skills is extremely important. Things like writing full, not shorthand, learning how to be a strong writer is still a really important skill to have. And we don't want to lose sight of that. So that is even getting an internship, learning what it means to kind of have responsibility in the workforce. You can pick up a lot just by being in a workplace in terms of culture. That we've talked a lot about culture today, and that's really important.
And there's often a fair amount of talk that the emerging generation don't have these social skills because they text each other when they're in the same room. They can't write a complete sentence. So is that a challenge for you to get people to speak English to humans?
It can be, but there's also other perks that come along with those changes. I see the way and the speed at which youth are communicating with each other, the way they rise up when things come up in terms of when they see something unjust or they see something that's wrong, they're speaking up, they're gathering, they're connecting at an even faster rate. It just might not always be in person, it might be online. And so what we struggle with is how do we still have both and still show that both can be really effective. Sometimes you need some that's more online, shorthand, not in person, but other times you really need bodies in the streets still. And so doing things like activism and organizing training with our students so that they still have those kind of organizational skills and can be effective leaders in both sectors.
What are some of the hot areas where you see a lot of Cal graduates going, where there's a lot of new jobs being created? What are some of the big areas?
Energy is still huge, especially in this area of the country, but really the emerging one and the one that I see the most passion around is food. And I'm not just talking about food production, I'm really talking about food justice and equity. A lot of hunger is not caused by production issues, it's caused by bad distribution of food, bad access, not equal access, not culturally appropriate foods. And we're not doing enough as a global community to really tackle those issues around food, making sure that everyone is having access to healthy, affordable foods. We still need to focus on production, but At Berkeley, because we're not Davis, which is where more of the agricultural studies happening, our students are really focused more on the justice, the policies, the equity issues around food.
So you can get involved in food and not have to be a farmer.
Absolutely.
In fact, there's a student-run grocery store at Cal. I can only imagine the munchies. I can only imagine what a student-run grocery store looks like. But tell us about how that operates.
I remember starting my job at Cal in 2010, and I was blown away that students had come up with their own business model to run a food cooperative on their own. When I was in college, I was trying to just get recycling bins on campus. And they do this incredible model where they're both trying to sell local, affordable, healthy, sustainable foods to the campus and the local community, but they're also using that store to educate folks. It's really an educational mission that drives that store. The store is completely student-run and volunteer-based, except for one paid operation manager. And they have hundreds of volunteers who give their time to managing that store. And students are really learning at a very early age how to run their own business, how to run their own nonprofit. And it never ceases to inspire me 6 years later.
Interesting. And is it healthy food, or is it all 5-hour energy?
It's healthy. Yeah, it's they really work very directly with their suppliers. They often have to change their suppliers. They work with their suppliers to make sure that they're getting the types of foods in that store that fit their mission.
Leonard Adler on food?
Yeah, within the broader green economy, one thing that I'm seeing, for example, are job fairs, specifically around food. There was one that just took place in the past couple of weeks. All about food, you may also hear the term food tech, and it overlaps in a few areas. And then to give you kind of one tip, and then combine that with a food job opportunity. So one tip is to just do a lot of networking. So this upcoming week here in San Francisco, there's actually a panel session about food, and one of the people on there is from a company, and I looked up, earlier today, looked up on their website, they have a bunch of jobs. And so if you're interested in food, by being able to go to a free panel that talks about food, and if there's a potential match, that's a great example of being able to kind of get a little leg up rather than simply sending in a cold email, a cold resume to an organization. So really networking and finding out conferences, events, meeting people, finding out if they have jobs, because maybe they didn't post it, on a job board, but if you go and find out about them, they will have those opportunities.
We've heard a lot lately about the pay gap. So Catherine Walsh, is the clean tech area any better or worse for women earning, 70 cents on the dollar versus men?
There are more programs that are being created because that gap has been identified, and there are entities that are trying to do work around that. So for example, local Bay Area nonprofit Grid Alternatives recently launched a Women in Solar program, and they're really trying to recruit more women, train more women in solar. We see a lot of new STEM pop-ups, whether they're centers or programs trying to draw more women in, women-identified folks. So there's still a long way to go. And while tech isn't my passion, one of the things I will say is sustainability in particular actually tends to have, I find, more women in it, which is very inspiring to me. Most of the sustainability folks at UC Berkeley are women. Most of the folks in sustainability and higher ed are women. And that is an empowering place for me to learn. And so I don't want it to be total gloom and doom story. There are a lot of community environmentalists that are being led by women in the community. And so definitely look for those mentors.
And Leonard Adler, there's often a hidden job market. There's jobs that are posted. How can people get at to the jobs that aren't posted, networking, et cetera, because there's sort of a hidden job market?
Yeah, that's definitely important, and I would think there would be a couple ways to think about that. Some organizations, like basically job boards, there's certainly jobs posted on job boards, so certainly I would make that a foundation, but to some extent, they're not all posted on there. And if you think about, there's some organizations that may be resource constrained. They may not have a lot of time. They might not have an HR department. If you're a small startup, maybe you don't have that. But they have jobs. And I actually posted something in my LinkedIn group. So I didn't use a formal job board, but just needed to get the word out about that. So a couple tips in terms of trying to tap into that hidden job market. So one would really be try to uncover companies that you'd want to work for in the space. And so mention kind of some of these panel sessions, but also another big opportunity are larger conferences. And there's a number that come through San Francisco, just to give you a couple of points. So one is called the Green Festivals. They have literally hundreds of vendors, and it's really pitched more as a kind of a consumer show, but every organization there could be a potential employer for you. So to research them in advance and use that as a networking opportunity, there's a large solar conference that comes into San Francisco every year, Inner Solar. So those are just a couple.
Catherine Walsh, how did you get to where you are, and what were some of the key turning and decision points where maybe you went down a road you didn't expect to?
I was really passionate about animals growing up, and it was in high school I started making connections between people and the environment, really around public health and environmental justice that made me switch gears. And when I got to college is like a playground for involvement if you're a student. Usually a college just has so many opportunities, whether it's volunteers, student organizations, internships, for you to really test anything out, find what works for you, and get that experience. And I found a passion in sustainability in higher education. But I also graduated at the height of the economic crash in 2008. And so I ended up working in special ed in a high school for about a year and a half before getting my job at Berkeley. I was also unemployed for a little bit. And in all those spaces, I was able to find experience or skills or really values that helped me get to Berkeley. Things like working with youth, things like working in education, even grit and stamina around being unemployed. Taking those kind of personal experiences to a job interview really helped me at Berkeley. And so, yeah, don't ever despair if your path takes a turn. Sometimes that actually makes you more valuable and interesting as a candidate to an employer.
Leonard Adler, how about your path to where you are today?
I come to this actually from an interest in poverty. I know this topic's brought up actually the issue of food. When I was growing up, my family was on food stamps, so we were hungry. And so that certainly a very personal connection. And from that background, I made it to Stanford, which is not the typical Stanford student profile. Our financial aid package was more than my family was getting. It was a family of 6, and felt extraordinarily fortunate to be at a place like that. And during my education, really learned about issues broader than my own experience growing up, and I thought, I wonder if there's a way I could use some of these gifts, these opportunities to contribute. And during my career, it was a little bit more on the anti-poverty side. I've had internships like the National Coalition for the Homeless, for example. But over time, I also ended up getting a law degree and did some things in the legal community and realized I wanted to get back to things a little bit closer to my heart. And so I left, and so as part of that, I was doing a job search and realized that when you're at an institution like a Berkeley, you'll have resources for a job search. And when you're not necessarily there, it's a little bit tougher. And so what I wanted to do is really kind of just to really share what I'd been learning in my own job search journey and trying to determine if there's a way that together, all of us who are on this journey could really create something bigger to help us all out. And that was really the genesis for Green Jobs Network. And so from that's really, it's grown far beyond my expectations in terms of, there's like 100,000 people on the LinkedIn group. There's people who will share job postings with each other, share tips with each other, and help each other out. So that's been, like everyone has said, it's a really unique journey for everybody.
I'm a member, I can attest to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Setbacks. People in Silicon Valley often talk about fail early, fail often, and failure is a badge of courage there, unlike a lot of other places. But Catherine Walsh, what is the time where you had a setback or you feel like, a failure, but you learned from it?
It was probably the 2 years after I graduated college and just being unemployed, living with my parents. We're the boomerang generation, as they call us, and not working in my field after being kind of a big fish at my college. That took a huge hit to my confidence. It took me a really long time to recover. And I would say, thankfully, I didn't give up. I found Berkeley, and I've made the most of it to really spend my 6 years getting as much experience, trying to get my confidence back, but really also rely on people like mentors, family, friends to kind of remind me that I was not a lost cause and that I had a lot to give and still really focus on.
Leonard Adler, sometimes in this country there's a notion that people who are poor, it's a failure, that they didn't work hard, et cetera. Was that an issue at all, growing up on food stamps? Did you ever encounter people that looked at you that way at Stanford or consider that a setback?
No, I mean, I think those issues are more internal. And so I think there's people who, if there's anyone listening, I would encourage you to not screen yourself out or not change how you value yourself because of messages you might get. I mean, that's probably the simplest way I could answer
And how
that.
about setbacks along the way where you stumbled and picked yourself off the ground and keep going? Obviously, you came quite a distance.
I think the idea of really just learning and testing and experimenting, which is part of the Silicon Valley startup culture, that's something I've tried to integrate. Certainly when I was starting Green Jobs Network, I definitely had no idea things would play out this way. There's things I've done where it didn't get a lot of response, but certainly being persistent, it helps a lot.
Catherine Walsh, a lot in the headlines these days about increasing tuition costs, UC system, student debt, the terrible, the very challenging student debt situation. So how is that pressuring career choices of the students as you advise?
One of the things we have at UC Berkeley is we have a campus green fund, and through that we fund, we've now funded in the last few years more than 250 paid student internships for students to focus on their passion, but still get paid to do that work. And so we really value paying students for their work and their experience so that they don't have to make that choice. Because especially in college, it's already really hard enough, and you're seeing more first-gen students, you're seeing more transfers, you're seeing parent students. They're dealing with a lot of financial constraints, a lot of pressure. They're having to balance school and work. So as folks who work in education, we should be doing our darndest to make that college experience as supportive and passion-focused as possible. And otherwise, maybe you should not be working in higher ed.
Leonard Adler?
I think it's important to make sure that you take care of yourself before you're trying to take care of a cause or something broader. So certainly being mindful of not leveraging yourself too much, because again, the best resource you have to contribute to this movement is yourself. And so you really have to prioritize taking care of that.
Leonard Adler, you talk about people who are looking for a job always think about being interviewed. People should also turn that around and interview the company. How do you do that?
No, that's a great point. I actually spent a little time working for Net Impact. For folks that may not be familiar with it, they're an organization that really focuses on promoting using business for social good. And so that's definitely a topic that gets discussed a lot. So there are some third-party sources you can research a company to find out what are their business practices. Are they an ethical company? So I would say I would go to some third-party sources to review their sustainability record.
Let's go to our audience questions. Welcome to Climate One.
Hi, my name is Taylor. In terms of an educational path, things I keep hearing nowadays are you really need 2 degrees to make a difference with how competitive the job market is. What are some of your thoughts on that in terms of pursuing higher educational paths?
Is grad school necessary, Catherine Moss?
For me, it has not been. Not to trying to be honest here, but I'm a well-respected person in my field, and I don't have a graduate degree. I have a lot of experience. I did get a certificate from our extension school just to further my education. I've also looked into getting my LEED Green Associates, but for some it is needed. For other paths, it's not. And you're right, you are hearing that more often, and I still think there's a lot of graduate schools that value you getting some work experience before just diving into grad school for the sake of a second degree. What I potentially want to go back to school now that I am 30, is very different than what I would have found at 22, and it might have been a mistake for me.
How about the graduates coming out of Cal? Do a lot of them plan to get an MBA graduate degree? And some of them know where they're going.
Some of them go straight to PhD. We have that. It's really common, and especially when you're dealing with Cal. There's pros and cons to both. I really just value real life world experience. I've worked now in higher ed for 6 years, and it is a bubble. Academia is a bubble. And it's really important, especially if you've already come from privilege, that you're experiencing a very different type of lifestyle at some time in your life.
Leonard Adler, graduate degree necessary in today's job market? Is the MA the new BA?
If there's certain occupation for which it's a prerequisite, so for example, if you were going to be a lawyer, a JD would be generally a prerequisite. If that's not the case, again, I wouldn't necessarily create additional obstacles or feelings like you're not good enough to do something. And so again, definitely work experience can count for a lot in terms of, if I'm doing hiring, I want to see what the person's done. That means a lot, not just what degrees they have.
Let's go to our next audience question. Welcome.
What ways aside from grad school would you advise for somebody, who doesn't have a technical skill set that they can apply, but has an interest in being a part of the green sustainable movement? How does one break into that field without necessarily having like the skill set or the degree to back it up?
Leonard Adler, I encounter people like this quite a bit. I'm passionate about climate change. I want it to be part of my job. How do I get in?
And if you think of all the different things that the environmental movement, sustainability movement, climate change, all those different areas, what things are of interest to you? Because you're going to have to kind of have some degree of specializing, position yourself to really find that match. That's one piece. And then the other piece is the skill sets and what unique contributions do you want to make to the organization? Because it's really a hiring process is helping the employer meet their needs. And so what can you do to really help facilitate that? And then obviously there's big pieces around networking both online. There's lots of great online opportunities to do that, and then in-person networking. You can join chapters, for example, of local organizations, just to give an example or two. The American Solar Energy Society has local chapters. You can join one of those, potentially take on leadership roles in that and find ways to kind of make your way and get known and get some additional kind of experience in your background to position yourself. You yourself could be a change agent by creating something. Again, here in the Bay Area, obviously the place for startups. So again, Green Jobs Network was something I created that's helped provide my own way to contribute. So certainly there's a whole ecosystem of supports to help you get a startup created. And then the other piece would be kind of tapping into other startups that are just getting really beginning, because they may have needs and maybe a little bit more flexible in their hiring processes. And to give you an example, every year there are business plan competitions, and so there are going to be very new companies in their life cycle. So an example is the Clean Tech Open. Every year there are some quality new enterprises that are getting small grants. So to find out who those organizations are and network with them, and to give you an example of one from another business plan competition, Revolution Foods. They won a competition, I don't know, maybe now more than 5-10 years ago. And so now they're a leading group to provide healthy meals in schools. And if you go to their website right now, you'll see 50 jobs on their website. But earlier on, they were just starting. So again, there's a whole life cycle for these. So startups are definitely something to look into.
Let's go to our next question. Welcome to Climate One.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm from the French American High School. And if we were to take a step back from the job market, what advice would you give to someone who's in a school where they're telling you that you should be knowing what you want to do as a career, and how would you identify that?
Catherine Walsh.
I would just kind of flip it on its head and say, I appreciate that advice, and so I'm going to play to my strengths and my interests and find some things that I can be involved with. We're very much a society that talks about improving our weaknesses, rather than putting all that energy into actually focusing on your strengths and going from there. You don't have to be good at everything. You should be good at something, and you can really hone in on that. And I can't speak to your high school, but if there's a club or there isn't one, maybe you're the person that starts that for you to get involved with and get some friends or local community members that want to support you.